Down toward Panther Lake, Panther Point, all this area down here. When you get it in the summer and winter, or summer and spring, early fall, these outside areas here on the shell and stuff are pretty good, continuously good during that time frame. The fish want to hang on that kind of stuff. But now, as we've gotten into the cooler times of the year and we've already had several fronts come through, we've got more that are headed down this way. Water temps are consistently dropping. Starting to see them consistently in the mid 60s to low 60s. Got another one that's coming this week that's going to drop our temps even more so that water temp will drop just a little bit more. So you maybe see it in the lower 60s, maybe even high 50s, depending on where you're at, depending on how cold it gets at nighttime. But these are the areas now you want to get on the inside of that, like on the inside of Panther Lake that's here. You've got all this shoreline that's on the inside of here. You've got the right kind of structure, which is this time of year. You're looking for mud and grass, which grass is a consistent thing that you want year-round no matter what you're fishing, what time of year it is. You always want grass in the area that you're going to fish. But then colder areas, colder months, you want mud because, again, mud holds heat, sand doesn't. That's a key factor, important thing to always remember where you're at in the time of year and where your structure is and what type of areas that you're fishing. So if you're still trying to fish over hard-packed sand in those types of areas just for walking purposes, you're not going to be very productive on any given day. So remember that as you move forward, as we get into the wintertime, even colder months are ahead. Again, back here in Panther Lake, you've got all that type of structure in there. You've got manageable mud that's back in here. It's not terrible by any means. There's some spots that can be okay, just depending on your skill level and physically how you handle stuff like that. You get back in the backside of Swan, it's in here. So another thing, too, is you can be protected back here if you've got some, if you've got a west wind or northwest wind or north wind, northeast wind, all this area back here is pretty good as far as protection. Now, getting to it, that's a different story because if you got a straight north wind that's pushing across San Antonio Bay and you're running that shoreline coming down to Panther, coming out of Ayers Bay, yeah, that'll be a little bit tricky to operate. But you can do it if you take your time, just be smart about it. Working all these back areas back here, work the shoreline, work out in the middle, paying attention to what your tides are. We've had a lot of water, again, push back in here. Another thing with this fluctuating tide that we've got, it'll drop out there. We had a couple of days where it was negative, and then it came right back a day or so later, and it was right back up again. So, again, it's a major thing that you always have to pay attention to is those tides, especially depending on what kind of boat you got, whether you can get into some areas or not. Because the way these tides are moving, they're really big, a lot of water dropping in, a lot of water coming back in. So you'll have to be smart about where you're going and where you can go. If you get on the outside, work your way down towards Cedar Lake. All this back in here, very good. Lots of bait working back in here. Working the shorelines, working the deeper edges all around Cedar. Working this outside edge here as we go back toward Twin. Haven't been past Twin in quite some time, so Twin's far as if I've gone. So you can work these areas in here, again, depending on what your tide is and what's going on with it, how much water's in there. Those areas, Cedar Lake, Twin Lakes, those are tide predicated locations, so be careful about that. Just make sure that you got the right amount of water if you're going to make that run all the way up there, whether you're coming from Seadrift, or if you're coming from Charlie's, or if you're coming from the Rockport, St. Charles area. Depending on where you're trekking from, that's a long haul to not be able to get where you need to get to. But main things, in the down south, we've been throwing the supermodels. Now we're fixing being a full moon. In fact, we are right at the full moon and transitioning as we get toward this week and stuff. We'll be on the back side of that full moon. So again, your early mornings will be your best opportunities, and then, of course, late evenings will be your second best opportunities. Middle of the day during full moons are most difficult. Can you catch fish during those times? Yes, you can, but you really have to just kind of grind and work. So that's why I would suggest you target early mornings, late evenings if you're wanting to fish around the full moon. That's going to give you your best opportunities. But in the down south, supermodels, we've thrown a few. Not a tremendous amount, but the main things we've been throwing there has been burner shads in original size. Just matching what the water clarity is. Big Papa, Twisted Tea, Mud Minnow, Firecracker, in the a little bit more translucent. White Ice, Bone Diamond have all been very solid baits so far, continued being good. Watermelon Red in those flavors as well have all been good. You want to throw those 16th ounce jig heads. Been throwing soft dines and soft dine XLs, multiple different flavors in that, depending on what you like. I like the more pure colors, like matching what a mullet flavor looks like. I'll throw those. Throw the bone diamond in those. I'll throw some purple and silver. But just kind of mix it up a little bit if that's what you like to do. But my favorite thing there is just throwing more of the pure flavors. Depending on these edges, how much water you got to work those edges, you can let that stuff fall off and get down to those time frame and let that just kind of drift off that and work the deeper grass beds. It's been really good. The knocking tails, the same flavors, white ice, rogue. It's been all those different types of flavors and have been good for us. Heavy metal, greenback, those are the same ones. Those flavors we've been chunking have been very good for us, very consistent. So again, 16th ounce jig heads, nothing more than that. In the marker 54 and the jerk shrimp, those in the white have been good for us. Been bouncing those off the edges around the grass, maybe a little bit deeper cut or an edge when that water dropped out there for a couple of days. We had a negative tide. We would throw some of those down some of those deeper guts and just kind of bounce them off the bottom and catch some fish with those in there. So those are things that you want to kind of keep in your box as we're fixing to, we're trending into right in the middle of the full moon, getting on the back side of the full moon. So again, we've got real big moving tides right now because of that big moon that's in place. So again, our weather patterns are going to be kind of funky with these fronts that are coming in there. So make sure that you pay attention to what those patterns are because you can get yourself in a little bit of predicament. Majors and minors, man. Majors and minors are the big thing, big key. Minors during the full moon have been very productive for us, especially in and around these types of areas. So just keep those in mind and be safe out on the water. Over here on the fingers of Carlos, got lots of shell that's in here. Talked about these lots before. You've got the guts that are in there, and those are the prime things that you really kind of want to focus on in and around these shell. I know I've talked about that, you don't want to focus on shell bars and shell reefs and that type of thing, but the thing about this here is you got mud and a little bit of grass that's in some of this area, not a tremendous amount of grass, but more mud that's in the guts of these things, and that's the areas that you really want to focus on is getting these guts. Weight up and down these depending on what winds you got. Now, if you got these big howling winds coming out of the north, this is one of the areas that you probably want to avoid, not try to get into. You may want to tuck yourself in over there on Dunham Island up there against that shoreline when it's coming from that direction. It's a smart play to get there. But if you have the right kind of day, maybe post front after 2 or 3 days there, and you got a nice little warming trend that's coming. You got your big, nice bluebird sky that's in place, lower winds, then this is one of those areas that you can kind of target and fish in and around those types of things. Fish those guts, fish these edges that are out here. Depending on what your tide's doing, if it's probably dropped out somewhat, then you get out here a little bit further, a little bit deeper water, and just kind of fish those edges there. And then you can work your way over toward Dunham and fish the gut, the old ICW that cuts through. That's really deep water that's in and around that area. So it's always something that you really want to be careful of when you fish that, especially if you're going to wade it, because it's a gradual drop and then it just kind of drops out on you. So, there's some spots that are in this particular area that's, 18 to 20 foot deep. So it's something to be aware of if you're going to wade this particular area. But you got some nice quality mud that's in the backside of some of these things here. One little spot here behind one of these little islands where it's really, really silty bad mud. You can put yourself in a little bit of a predicament if you're not careful there. I've been down that road there, so just be smart about that. Once you get into some mud that's more than what you want to, you might want to back out of it or just kind of do your best working it, fishing it wise. Getting around that and get up here on this back shoreline, work this shoreline here. All around that, you got some nice good structure there that you can get around these points and then back down Dunham here. It's like I say, it's a good fishable area when you got a nice northwest wind. You can stay protected on the shoreline depending on what kind of wind that you got as far as miles per hour go. Again, down south lures and the flavors that I mentioned earlier, primarily your original and burner shad size. You can incorporate the supermodel in there if you so choose. We have not had as much production with it, but nonetheless, we still have caught a few fish on it. Not quite as much as we have with the originals and burners, just simply because, again, we're around the full moon phase. The knocking tails, the same thing. Throwing the 4-inch version down to their 3-inch version there. Of course, been throwing the 3-inch more in the watermelon red has been good for us. There's been a melon green kind of a nice little change of pace and just kind of a little bit more off-colored water. It has been good. But again, the white ice for us, Pearl has been good in that. Of course, Rogue has been good for us for a long time. Can't go wrong with Rogue throwing it because it's got lots of different variables and colors and phases to it, so it's a great choice to have on. And then, of course, the Soft Dine and Mirrodine have been very good for us as well. Really easy to work those baits in around these edges and a little bit deeper drops. Just kind of take your time working those things there and just kind of pay attention to what the speed of your drop is, so you don't work it too high in the water column, because that is a big factor if you work that too high up in that water column. You want that thing more above just that grass line, just kind of floating in and across that to get your opportunities. Again, weather patterns are a big deal this time of year, majors and minors. Again, we're in the big full moon phase right now. We're going to be on the back side of it here in a couple of days, so always keep that in mind on the areas that you're going to fish. Pay attention to what your water temps are, too. That's a big deal this time of year, but just take your time. Work these areas. Lots of little trout in some of these areas, but there's been some quality fish that's been in and around these redfish as well. So take your time, work it. Use those different style baits and colors and just kind of experiment and see what's working best and being most productive for you. Back up here in Mission Bay, Mission Lake, Mission River, that whole back shoreline, everything over to the right, whether it's on the left-hand side, anywhere, you got all this great shoreline that you can fish here. And remember, some of this area in here, not all of it, but some of this area in here has got some super silty mud, so just make sure that you're aware of that. If you're going to jump out of the boat and fish back up in here, I would make sure that I would probe that first before you jumped out of your boat and work some of these areas. All on the back shoreline, close to the river, on the other side of the river, like you're going to go to the Mission Lake, all that back there, all good, solid bottom that you can wade. It's got some manageable mud areas in there. You can get some back lakes, go up off the river there. You can get up in the river itself. Now, if you're going to try to wade in the river on the edge, the bank or whatever, it's going to be kind of difficult to do, so you may want to stay in your boat on that particular thing there and just kind of work those areas until you come across the fish that you're looking for, especially if you got the right tides. Now, again, we've got a lot of water that's in our system right now. If you can take advantage of that while that's going on, then yes, do it. You can get real good protection here on this right-hand side, on the north side of Mission Bay. Big cliffs in there, so if you got a big, strong northwest wind, you can stay protected in it. You know, it take a little bit of a whipping getting across Copano Bay, but sometimes juice is worth the squeeze, so you may want to just do that and see what it's all about. Just a different area that opens up for you during this time of year. You can really have some productive quality days back in this area. I personally like to get on the edge just down from the river, work around that point on that whole back shoreline like you're going to go toward Mission Lake, and then get up into Mission Lake and fish all that area back in there. That's the really good kind of mud. It's a mud sand mix that's back in that. So some of that area is back in there. There's not a tremendous amount of grass that's out around that, but on your edges, you got a nice shorelines that's there, and some little mouths that kind of go back off into the shoreline and those types of areas there, so you can work those areas. Just make sure that you understand that when you jump off the boat back there, it's going to be probably high ankle, low calf type of mud in those types of areas back there, so be aware of that when you do get out of your boat and start wading that. But prime location this time of year, typically that type of water that's back in there is going to be just a tad bit warmer than it would be out in the open water, which is what you're looking for, and that's the whole thing, is finding the climate for what these fish are wanting to be in and around. And that's why mud's so important. You can come back up to the front and work around these little islands right here, a little cut through, all the little mangrove spots in and around those types of things there. Just pay attention to what wind that you have. If you got a north wind that's going to be blowing into this, you want to get on the other side, and then vice versa. If you got it coming from south, southeast, this up in here will be nice and protected in the shoreline all the way around. So just take your time working these areas back in here. It's not a fast-paced thing. We have found fish back in here, redfish. Nothing great trout-wise, but that means they're not there. We've caught some quality fish there in the past, just not so far this year. There's been more redfish back in those areas that we have caught. But you know, there is some solid trout that we have caught back in there. Main thing that we've been using back here has been the original size down south and the soft dines. Soft dine XL primarily have been very good for us, working that nice and slow over top of some of the grass and these edges and potholes that you can find back in these areas. And just kind of dangling that and letting them just suspend and work those areas with those soft dines and with the originals from down south. Again, 16th ounce jig heads, so it can just kind of glide through your water column, because we're finding these fish, you know, they're pretty much stuck to the bottom now for the most part, hovering over the top of that mud to stay warm. Next time you catch you a trout or redfish, just turn them over and check their belly and see if you can see the sea lice that are hanging on to them down in there. You'll see a little bitty white microscope, or not microscope, but just little bitty parasites on the outside of them that move around, and that's just a great indicator to you that lets you know where these fish are hanging out. So that's going to be the kind of the areas where you're going to want to make your baits accessible to those fish down in those types of areas. That's why your suspended baits are really good. You know, if you're a corky fan, bust your corkies out and start working those over there, so you may have a little bit better quality fish. That's why we've been throwing the soft dines. Very good. We've caught some good quality fish with those. I mentioned in the past, though, if you start getting into redfish, make sure you have a couple of extra baits, because they will tear those suckers up after you've caught 3 or 4 of those. Again, just work your edges. Pay attention to what your tides are doing, because Mission Bay can get really skinny on you when that water's really pushing out of there. And you don't want to get caught back in some of these areas and not have enough water for your boat to get up and get out of there. So make sure you pay attention to that. Make sure you pay attention to the weather patterns. Dress appropriately. If water temps are getting cooler, air temps are getting cooler. So if you're not dressed right for it, you can be in extremely uncomfortable conditions, and there's no reason to do that. So just take too much. If you don't need to wear it, leave it on the boat. If you got it, then you got it. So make sure, again, look for your bait back in these areas, majors and minors. Pay attention to weather. Make sure that you're safe out there on the water and have a good time.